Ladies and gentlemen, it's a day ending in Y, so you know what that means. Time to cover yet another Emiya upgrade. Some servants just seem to get all the buffs. Nevertheless, hello everyone, Soberoni of G&A Reviews here with a servant spotlight update for FGO's real best mom, Emiya. Because saltiness aside, he received a massive upgrade recently in JP that has dramatically altered his gameplay. That's right, our boy has finally gotten the one buff that fans have been asking for since his release in FGO 5 years ago, in Arts NP. His new strengthening now upgrades his projection skill into Trace On. This new skill not only increases the card effectiveness buff of all his cards to 50%, but also now allows Emiya to change his NP from Buster into Arts for one turn if he chooses. Now this is a brand new strengthening in JP, so don't expect to see this buff in NA until our 5th anniversary in about 2 years. The implications of this buff are pretty obvious, but nonetheless they're still massive. Firstly, the extra 10% card effectiveness buff now gives Emiya a straight up 50% buff to all of his cards, making it arguably the best version of Mana Burst around. And if we ever get a servant in the future who can alter the command cards of another servant, the synergy could be pretty hilarious. The additional buff to damage is nice, but of course, the far bigger upgrade for Emiya is that he is now able to use an Arts Noble Phantasm, and that single-handedly changes his entire gameplay function by opening up a whole new realm of supports and team compositions that he can benefit from. Emiya can now function solidly in any arts-based team, without having to worry about his misplaced Noble Phantasm. Powerful art steroids like Fox Wedding and Caliburn can be used to buff his Noble Phantasm, and he can work even better in arts-based crit teams while still retaining the ability to integrate into Buster teams as well. This makes him one of the most versatile and well-rounded servants in FGO. It's also important to remember that Emiya's Noble Phantasm still retains the same amount of hits even when it's switched to Arts, which then makes it a 10-hit AoE Arts NP. The amount of NP refund from this Noble Phantasm is insane enough to make Jean Archer and Mordred Ryder feel insecure. It basically guarantees that Emiya can Noble Phantasm again immediately afterwards, since it refunds upwards of 100% NP charge in nearly every scenario. Being able to Noble Phantasm on back-to-back turns is highly exploitable, even if that Arts Noble Phantasm only lasts for one of those turns, because with allies like Tamamo who can reduce the cooldown on Trace On, or allies like Waver who can provide straight up NP charge, Emiya can be made into a legitimate NP spammer on Arts teams. And as you can see from the footage in the video, he can also 3-turn farm very consistently with double Castoria using free-to-play CEs like Painting Summer. Although you will also need to swap in a Waver or Rhaenys to top him off on the 3rd wave unless you have a Super Scope. He may not be the most optimal 3-turn farmer, but he can still do it, which is saying a lot of a servant who's also capable of being a top-tier crit servant and an Arts or Buster DPS as well. It's hard to find many servants who can play so many roles and be as effective in so many areas as Emiya, regardless of rarity. Now that isn't to say that Emiya is perfect or game-breaking. His evade skill is still very basic, his non-crit damage is subpar, and it can still be awkward to use him in some battles since you do have to rely on his Trace On skill being off of cooldown. That said though, these are just nitpicks, mostly because as a hybrid Arts Buster servant, Emiya does have access to so many broken supports that more than compensate for anything that he lacks. Speaking of which, I highly recommend using Emiya with Tamamo and Castoria. Tamamo is excellent for longer battles because of her cooldown reduction and NP charge, which can allow Emiya to really let loose with the UBW spam, while Castoria can of course enable looping for some more farming-centric strategies. Caster, Guild, and Mozart are also highly recommended if you want to go for Arts crit teams. And when it comes to craft essences for Emiya, I recommend anything that gives starting NP charge if you're looking to farm, like Kaleidoscope, Painting Summer, and Welcome to Oniland. These will make 3-turn farming a whole lot easier and more consistent. Otherwise, for longer fights, I recommend craft essences that both buff Arts and Buster damage, like Sailor in White, Sweet Days, and Afternoon in the Citadel. These work best since no matter the circumstances, Emiya will be using a mix of Arts and Buster NPs. For command codes, I recommend Gakyo no Ofude on an arts card since it increases arts crit damage by 20%, which is very relevant to Emiya considering his deck structure. Overall, I believe Emiya's Trace On buff is possibly the best one he's received up to date. It removes his biggest weakness, which was the inconsistent nature of his deck, and it allows him to easily integrate into the most meta and powerful arts teams around, while also benefiting from buster supports too. I mean, how many other servants can be paired with Tamamo and Merlin and still benefit from all of their buffs? He can also be used much more effectively as a farmer thanks to his ridiculous NP refund and Castoria enabling him to loop, all this while still remaining among the best crit DPS servants available at any rarity and having unmatched all-around versatility. With all that said, Emiya's score gets an easy upgrade from B+ to A+. For those of you who don't already have him, I would highly recommend picking him up later on this year when we get our next free SR ticket, because he's fully worth it, and in my opinion, he is among the best 4-star servants available in JP or NA. And those are my thoughts on Emiya's buffs. I admit I'm a little salty that Abby still hasn't gotten a buff, but at least Emiya can finally live up to those expectations that people have had of him all these years. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments down below, and also let me know who you'd like me to cover next in this series of Spotlight reevaluations. And if you haven't already, do follow us over on Twitter, chill with us on Twitch, and join the party over on our Discord, all linked in the description down below. And until next time, this is Soberoni, signing out. Later.